Hello and welcome to eCommerce Matters, brought to you by BlackCurve. We help e-commerce businesses make pricing decisions. Oh, goodness me. You'd have thought I had this down by now.
It's episode 25.
Hello and welcome to eCommerce Matters, brought to you by BlackCurve. We help e-commerce businesses make pricing decisions. Today's title is eCommerce Matters 2020, a year in review. I'm sure some of you out there would prefer the title 2020 can bleep off, but hey ho, it's been okay and ups and downs for some of us. Well, we've done 24 episodes, would you believe, Rob, since June, so we've got a lot to cover, and today is going to be one of those recap videos of best bits, so I hope you are ready. As always, I'm joined by I should call you the elf of data, shouldn't I, today? Because it is Christmas after all, Dr. Rob Horton. I'm Philip Huthwaite, founder of BlackCurve, and without further ado, here we go. All right, Mr. Elf, how are you doing today? Are you in Christmas spirit?
I'm in data spirits, I guess. Take it, make of that what you will.
Well, being it a year in review, for those of you who are new listeners, more recently we've decided to bring a prop for our various podcasts, just to summarise the particular topic that we're talking about. So have you got a particular prop that you'd like to summarise maybe this year, something that would summarise our podcast experience of the last 24 episodes, Rob?
Yeah, I have. I've got Sarah Raven's Grow, Cook, Eat Diary 2021.
Oh.
The reason I've got this is because I can't wait for 2020 to be over.
So you're in the 2020 can bleep off camp, basically.
Yeah, I haven't really left my house for months.
Well, I think icing on the cake, before digesting, I think I knew that 2020 was due to end. My other half was in a car accident yesterday, so totally fine. But my top tip that's not pricing related is don't buy a smart car, buy a Volvo, because this smart car was like, it drove into the back of her, and this smart car was totally kind of KO'd, whereas there was a mere blip in the rear bumper. So I think I've probably mentioned Volvos quite a few times in these podcasts, but you know, year in review, I think that was the final one of going, right, I think we're done with this year, aren't we? Aren't we all? So my prop for today is I've gone festive because why not? And wait for it. He does a little dance as well. And I'm continuing the theme because I normally nick things from around my house invariably. This isn't my son's toy though, so I think I'll get away. I'll get away with that. By the way, what was your favourite prop? I've got a favourite prop of yours. So my favourite prop of yours, because it made me the chuckle the most, was your dominoes when you said and I might snip it in. So I think I'll snip it in. So for those of you who didn't hear, here it is.
Well, mine is a bit of a reach. Because we've recorded 2 in quite close succession, so I'm still in Devon and I still haven't properly moved in. But I have a domino set.
Oh.
So the what we'll talk about it later, but how a small change at one end can have a massive knock on all the way down to the other. Told you it's a reach.
I like it. I'm not sure if I now want to show you what I've got.
Is it a domino set?
It's a domino set. It's a lovely wooden... What was your favourite prop, Rob, by the way?
I like your little shop.
Yeah, my little shop.
It's not Reaper's, is it?
No. It's totally mine. It's mine. I play with it all the time. And I think, what was that, the one where when I get peckish I can eat plastic fruit?
Yes, exactly. And yeah, I think that was my favourite because it was on point and also quite nostalgic.
You wished you had one of those. So we've done 24 episodes. Before we dive in, was there one that was a particular favourite of yours, or should I wait until the end to ask that particular question?
I think I really enjoyed the kind of Teardown ones. I think for me they're certainly often more interesting because we can talk at theory. I mean, we can talk pricing theory for length, but seeing the practical impact of it is cool. I also really liked the more tactical ones, like how often should you change your price and that kind of stuff, because there's a lot of like relevance to what we do on a daily basis, and that kind of bridging that gap between pricing theory, which actually a lot of, I think, just doesn't work in practice. So what can you actually do and what difference can you make?
Yeah, I mean, we started doing the pricing teardowns a bit more recently, didn't we? We did one about sporting goods, which if it hasn't been released yet, it will soon be released. And we did one kind of last month or so about the appliance sector. And one thing that I was quite surprised about is that the sectors that are changing price more frequently than others certainly seem to be, as we said, it was the appliance sectors. It's the ones that are selling kind of branded goods that are hyper competitive, and that kind of leans itself more to your dishwashers, your washing machines, your cookers, and certainly in the teardown and the data that we looked, there was a lot of movement. There was a lot of movement in those markets, whereas more recently in the sporting goods sector, there certainly seemed to be increased stability. Now, we said in the particular podcast, didn't we, that we were summarising and looking at discrete elements of time, but it seems to indicate that certain sectors have got are more mature with their pricing, have sort of instilled automation, and they're almost ahead of the curve as well with their pricing operation.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think it probably ties in a lot with supply chain as well. So the more competitive you are anywhere, the more likely you're going to need to automate everything really to keep up. I think because I mean, what's Richard that says it, but there are three ways businesses can compete. One of which is operational efficiency, and that's really where pricing optimization really sits for most people. I think certainly normal businesses anyway.
Well, because we've said that, and we'll come across automation and efficiency in a few moments. And actually, we did that right out of the gate, didn't we, on our first episode? But because we're doing things a bit backwards today, because I've asked you what your favourite is, I'll tell you what my favourite is. I really enjoyed our buy, never knowingly undersold, which was a view on John Lewis ditching their price promise. And if I'm honest, it was because from a personal point of view, it was a nice opportunity to go down memory lane, because I used to be a John Lewis partnership partner. I don't know if you're a partner or you're an employee. I forget the business jargon there, but I was an employee of the John Lewis partnership, and so it was a nice look back to my 16, 17, 18-year-old self, which unfortunately is becoming further and further away in the past. It feels like yesterday, but more than a decade's gone. I mean, I can call you the oldie because you're a few months older than me, so
we're basically the same age, so everything that Philip says applies equally to me. I think I've got like 6 months on him or something, but
we're the same school year, so I still work in school years. That's I don't know what age you suddenly stopped working in school years. Maybe we'll have that for another podcast topic.
It just defines your life.
When we're 87 or whatever and sitting in our respective care homes and speaking to each other, we can say, well, you in the year above or the year below me. That'll be the conversations that we're having with our other inmates at the care homes. So anyway, before we digress, so shall we go through some of these episodes? So we're not going to go through all 24 episodes, don't worry, because we could be here a while, and we'll do a mixture of us commenting on what we, summarising the points, and also don't worry, we'll also look back to the actual podcast titles themselves, the podcast clips themselves. So the first one there is, how often should an e-commerce business change prices? And actually, this was, would you say this was a controversial one out of the gate, Rob?
I think so, and I think it's something that we're continually learning and refining our view on at BlackCurve. So I think, well, let's roll the clip and then we can go into it maybe.
The frequency with which you change your prices has more of an impact of how well you perform rather than what time or what day of the week you change your prices, which seems a bit bizarre when you think of it. But to a certain extent, you're trying to get to market efficiency. You're trying to win, and you've got to rapidly make lots of pricing changes, especially if you've got thousands and thousands of products on a continual basis to get to that point. Whereas if you change it at 9 p.m. versus 10 p.m. on a Monday or a Tuesday, fundamentally, how many different units are you going to sell in that 24-hour period? Right? Is that going to make a massive? Is that going to turn the needle for your business? So what was the key takeaway, Rob, from the episode for you?
Well, my memory is famously trash, so my views might have changed, but I think it was really there's a market frequency that you need to keep up with to stay competitive, and that really dictates how often you should change your price. My view on that has become slightly more nuanced in that I am beginning to believe there is a clear distinction between how often you should be collecting, analyzing, and looking at data versus making an action, which kind of one of those things that probably sounds quite obvious when you say it out loud, but isn't necessarily in the heat of battle. Because I really believe that you need up to the minute data, because traditionally businesses have worked in these kind of cycles. So I do a weekly price sweep, a monthly price sweep, a quarterly price sweep. Actually, your prices should be able to change at any given point. It's just the frequency at which they change on average will be around the market frequency, and then that will vary based on products within your inventory and the rest of it. So whilst it does kind of average out to about a week in e-com, just because of business cycles, buying processes, and the rest of it, you should be obtaining your data and at least checking for, like, algorithmically or otherwise, much more frequently than that, I think, is my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look back at when we actually recorded that, it was in June, and the dust had settled a bit on lockdown. But actually, even in the first few months of lockdown and in a pandemic environment, the more efficient you are, the more kind of gutsy, gritty, the more you've got automated. Obviously it helps if you've got a product that people want, but you're more likely to succeed. You increase your chances of success. And I think the key takeaway that I had from that is that if you look at a lot of retailers' portfolios and you do an average across their entire portfolio, they're changing prices sort of once a month, once every 2 months, once every 3 months, when you do an average of all kind of 3,000, 4,000 up to 100,000 or so products. And I think the businesses that are doing more successfully, and certainly the ones that we've seen, are the ones that have automated their pricing, are doing price tests and nudging the price to identify what is the right price at any given time, and therefore they are coming out on top. So therefore the key takeaway I took from that was that by the natural product, the ones that are looking to optimize are making decisions more frequently, and the byproduct of that is that they're kind of coming out on top. And I'd sort of agree also with your statement just now, actually, of on the backdrop of kind of a second lockdown, actually the frequency which you collect, the higher the frequency you collect, the smarter that those decisions can be. Because actually we identified that changing price a week between price changes is actually uber valuable, you're actually really quite strong. But if you're constantly listening to the market, you can work out what day of the week you should change, what time of day you should change, what products are changing more frequently. So where can you get a steal on the market? And you can't make those nuanced changes if you haven't constantly got an ear to the market.
Yeah, and I think it's been a fascinating year for it as well, in that, like, I mean, hand on heart, neither of us could have predicted the kind of the business cycles and how e-com's changed, certainly since that episode, actually, which was right at the start of lockdown. Talking to our customers, they've seen periods of like zero competition as people didn't have any stock apart from them, so they don't need to change prices at all or compete with anything, stop their ad spend completely because they were getting so much organic traffic that they didn't even need to advertise. And then stepping into kind of the end of the year, things become more normal, and then number of price changes increases, as does the amount of ad spend, more competitive market, all those kind of things. And then coming to a second lockdown or end of season, similar cycles, weird Black Fridays, which we went over in sporting goods in particular, but not much price movement at all in that either. So I think this is why it becomes really important to be able to be agile or dynamic within your marketplace, because I don't think now it's so easy to predict like a business cycle or kind of to say you should be doing this once a week, or for this group of products once a week, for these group of products once a month, the rest of it, because so much weird stuff is going on that you don't know what products people are going to buy. Seasonality, if you lock everyone indoors, is blown out the water. So really having an automated process that just handles it is probably a much smarter thing to do than try and apply kind of classical business knowledge. And I know we may get onto the AI stuff later, but one of the really interesting fallouts for me is that everyone's models have been blown up. And I don't give a shit what anyone says to you. If they're telling you that they can use the past 3 years data to tell you something about this year, they're lying. It's such a different environment. So all these kind of tactical questions that we've been asking, how often should I change my price? How should I treat my competitors? Blah, 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 blah. Are really, really different, actually, probably even from when we did the podcast, which I think is cool, really cool, but also quite hard.
So in episode 3, we looked at why competitive data is crap, and we'll just cue a clip to tee that up.
The difficulty is to do with the curation of those results. So the search term that you search in Google will dramatically affect how accurate a match you get out the other end. So if you assume that you could search for a product and then get decent competitive data to the other side, that's very naive, right? And you can disprove that very easily just by go and Google Hoover and see what results you get back, right? And then Google Dyson Hoover, see what results you get back, and then Google Dyson V10 Animal Hoover, and you're still getting really, really inaccurate search results because Google is doing its best to make your life easier, right? As a shopper, because Google's saying, okay, yeah, I know you want this Hoover, but have you looked at all these other ones, right? Look, it's a competitive marketplace out there. You might want the V7, you might want another brand. And that is what makes actual gathering of data difficult. Because when you're trying to find a like-for-like match for a client, if you're not very careful about how you do it, you're going to drag in all that other data that isn't actually relevant.
So Rob, why do you still agree with some of those points of why competitor data is crap?
So that hasn't changed. Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I agree with that. All still crap, still hard to scrape.
I think we caveated the actual podcast itself by we had a controversial title to it was actually our own market testing, wasn't it, to see if putting a bit of a controversial title would get more listens, and it did. So it sort of proved that we maybe have to put in a bit of a crass swear term in more of these titles, but
yeah, it's worth saying that actually the feedback around that was incredibly positive. I think we struck a chord there with a lot of people using the data day in, day out, and the struggles they actually have. So I don't think it was just us screaming into the abyss.
But I think my key takeaway from that was that really a kind of making people aware, because I don't think a lot of people, if you haven't used competitor data before and you go and find a competitor data supplier, you kind of assume, you take it on face value that, well, of course it's going to be the right match, or of course that data is going to be great. I mean, one of the things that we flagged in the podcast is that we know one of our competitors of ours doesn't collect data on a weekend. Right, that's like peak trading environment. So you have no visibility of whether or not, whether or not prices are changing over the weekend, and it's kind of just to a certain extent just flagging that, right, you've got competitor data, take a pause, try and understand, what is it's telling me, what can I 100% believe, and what do I need to build in other, I don't know, robust metrics, whether it be, minimum price safeguards if you're going to do repricing off the back of data which you're not kind of 100% sure of. But I've certainly, since June, I founded BlackCurve on one of the frustrations of a lot of retailers were blindly following competitor data, and actually for a certain extent at the early days of BlackCurve I had a real sort of almost disgust of competitor data, where I was very much an advocate of making decisions based off your sales history, based off of stock levels and so forth, and that still very much is the case. But I think it's to come back to what we said earlier around the frequency which you listen to the market, the listening to it doesn't mean that you have to proactively follow everything. And I think that's where we're coming at it from. You need to know its flaws, and then you need to use what is not flawed, or even what is slightly flawed, to support you with your subsequent decision making.
Yeah, I think this is interesting, because I think this is one of the things where we started quite far apart, and obviously through working together have come to the middle, because I was much more on the other side of competitor data, because it's a really useful hack in that we spoke about this, I think, in a number of podcasts, but and in this one, that if it's the only lens you've got on the marketplace, it's a pretty good one.
In episode 4, we looked at how relevant is price elasticity now, and I think it was recorded in June. Should we just roll the clip? Price elasticity is sometimes put on a pedestal, right? It's almost aspirational. It's up there for something that businesses want to unearth. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a dark art, kind of, there's almost like a veil is put over it, and e-commerce companies and retailers sort of hope that by unearthing, taking off the veil, suddenly they'll unlock all the hidden secrets, and that will solve all their worldly problems, and that is what will help them, unlock extra revenue and extra profitability. So I think I'm quite nervous, I have to say, about this particular podcast, because certainly I always caveat these conversations that I have with clients that it absolutely is a dark art. I think I'm not, but it's got to be used with caution. There's a time and a place for it. So it's clear there that the summary is it's not that relevant now because obviously your previous models that you built, even if you built fantastic price elasticity models, supply chains are constrained, people's buying behaviors are all over the shop. People are buying completely different things because of lockdown, and actually, so it was quite a relevant. It was very timely that we did that particular title in June. But even if we step away from, we remove the kind of COVID factor, I'm going to call it now. Would you agree, Rob, that people historically are not changing prices enough to have a reliable model to calculate price elasticity?
Yeah. I think there are routes to it, but I don't think the space is advanced enough. I mean, again, to go back to the how often you changing your price thing. For context, I did some research on some internal data sets, and I wanted to look at how many price changes do I need to get kind of what I'd view as a statistically significant price elasticity value. And it's around 80. And at a minimum, it's 30 unique price changes. And that is, if you want to do it at a product level, that's changing the price every day for a month. And most of those prices will be quote unquote wrong. And then even if you do it a category or you can group products, no one naturally is really changing price enough over a wide enough range in the kind of e-com space. So you do see it. We've got clients who do it, but they tend to be more sophisticated or have more sophisticated businesses who are happy to kind of take the, I don't know if sophisticated or right, sophisticated in terms of the view of pricing within their business, I guess I should say. So they're willing to take a profitability or revenue hit to experiment.
I mean, the main thing that I've taken away from it is you need to change prices a lot to get to a robust, to be able to use price elasticity in the way that I suppose it's intended. But if you haven't changed price 80 times, as you've alluded to, you can still use it as an indicator of, well, hang on, if I've increased the price historically, what impact has that had on volume, and use that as an indicator to price test further, or use it as an indicator to say, holy cow, I increased the price and sales dropped off a cliff.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But what I'd add to that, I think, is that if you're in a heavily competitive space like e-com in general, like e-com is, and it's only going to get more so now. I mean, if you look at the Black Friday data, it was all online because all the shops were shut. So people can't take that risk. Anyone who wasn't getting online is now getting online. We've been saying that for a while, but they're going to die if they don't, basically. If you're in a heavily competitive space, the window you're optimizing on is tiny. Like it's a few percentage points in the range. So unless you're selling enough for that to be impactful, which most of the people we work with won't be, because we tend to work in the SME space, it is kind of not worth the ROI, I guess is what I'm saying. That makes sense.
So in episode 6, we looked at profit-killing competitor pricing mistakes and how to avoid them. So let's have a refresh of what we spoke about.
This was another titled test.
To come back to the 50% of the time, it is a right decision to follow, and 50% of the time it isn't. That's why, I don't know if you like this term, but I'm going to say it anyway. You can tell me afterwards if you don't like it. It's the whole concept of a price skirmish. I think a price skirmish might be a better way to describe it, because absolutely there's a time when you should have a bit of a skirmish, because that you're trying to win customers, and that price, people do decide to buy from that product based on price. It's not a sexy product. It's available in lots of places. People have lots of options to buy it. Therefore, if a competitor of yours changes the price, you have to have a skirmish, and you have to follow sometimes, or you have to try and set the price and then see if they follow you back, right? But it's about using the data to then work out, when do I stop doing that and I don't just go into this pit of decline, and also when can I make decisions that aren't completely competitor led? Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
I like it, because it's price war is too grandiose for what we're talking about. We're not talking about strategic pricing, for want of a better term. We're talking about tactical pricing, just feeling about the marketplace, right? And so it's those little, like, those skirmish is quite a good term. Those little fights you pick, like, oh, I get a bit under, can they move, or do they? We've talked about it before, actually. It's you can say, are they efficient enough? Like, a lot of the time is, can I take a little bit? Can I drop a little bit here and just pick up the volume because they're not paying attention? And you have to respond, right? You have to respond. But the interesting thing is that if the whole market is moving, I guess, rather than players within the market, that's the difference. Nobody's winning, right? I mean, short term, the consumer's probably winning a bit, but longer term, maybe not, because actually the competitor price movement says nothing about consumer demand. And I think that's the key bit. It just says about, like you say, who's got the biggest kahuna? It's you or your competitor.
No, we like clever kahunas here, so not just having big kahunas for the sake of it. Well, we were testing. This was another title test, wasn't it, Rob? We were testing, we were testing the negative title versus the positive title. But that aside, what were your key takeaways from this particular podcast, or what are you seeing as some of the more recent competitor pricing mistakes that retailers are doing?
I think it's more. I think a lot of what we said was true in terms of racing to the bottom and making sure that you're using other data sets to protect your margin and working out what you can compete on and what you can't compete on and segmenting your inventory and all of that. I don't think that's changed. I actually think it's become, it went through a period of really, really not mattering, actually, because it was basically down to whether you had stock or not. And if you had stock, you could charge what you want. If you didn't have stock, you can sell it. But no, I think this kind of doing a proper competitor analysis and applying it to your pricing is hugely impactful. And I actually think it's more impactful than we thought, knowing what we know now, because of what we now know about how the Google marketing environment works. And
we'll hold that thought, Rob, because we are coming there next. Okay.
Well, that's what I got.
So in episode 12, back in the 17th of August, rather, it was published. We did a podcast called "Pricing: The Neglected Child of PPC." So let's roll the footage.
I guess it's because you're so focused on you want to deliver performance, right? And also, if I was in a retail company, I'd be like, okay, cool, I've got to go deal with this whole monumental task of convincing people that maybe our pricing might need to change in some way, shape, or form. Especially if it's for campaigns that are underperforming, like you've done everything possible. So that's why it's a sense of fear, but I guess the sense of fear should be flipped to a sense of like actually discovery and curiosity. It's like, okay, what if we do this? What if we adjust our prices for these products? What would that mean essentially from a performance perspective? And I think when you add in pricing to the overall performance improvement or conversion rate improvement conversation, that's when the conversation flips from actually we shouldn't change our prices to actually what can we do? How can we use pricing to improve performance? And that is the flip, which I think a lot more retail e-commerce.
So that's super interesting because it kind of ties in with what we were talking about in previous episodes, because what you're saying there is that it's heavily tied to the culture of the business, right? How well people communicate, how freely people feel like they can raise questions, and having, we were talking about it last week in terms of maximizing, it's more scientific rather than cultural, but maximizing net profitability of a product. Yep. And that should be your overall KPI, and your marketing people should be talking to your pricing people. But if you've got a marketing person who has to go over and effectively undergo a cultural change piece to get their point across, that ain't going to happen. Unless you have senior level buy-in. And I mean like C-suite. I don't mean just like you need this manager to talk to that manager. So I think that actually is probably core to a lot of why pricing isn't used throughout businesses, right? It's that because it's often misunderstood, which is why it's neglected, because it's a bit more nebulous and certainly harder to kind of conceptually get your head around, at least at first thought, because I actually think digital marketing is harder when you actually get into it, but that's another conversation for another day. And because it's less understood, I don't think people truly understand like the power of pricing within or how that this kind of part of a business exists, that they could just go and tap a guy or girl on the shoulder and literally be like, oh, you can actually solve like half my problems. In the case of digital marketing, you could probably save me a couple $100,000 like that, realistically, just because that communication channel isn't there.
So it is often I'm so surprised that pricing's kind of forgotten about, isn't it, Rob? It's almost shocking that if you read all the blog posts that people are not considering pricing when it has such a fundamental lever on improving conversions and impressions and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's certainly bizarre, and it's something that we've only really just started addressing at BlackCurve with a number of our clients. I think the listeners will be pleased to know that I'm now a qualified Google shopping ad
Woohoo!
person. So no, I've just been kind of working through a lot of the Google marketing materials, for want of a better term. I wouldn't say it was really an academy when it's just telling you why Google is great for 2 hours. But that's digression. Yeah, I think it's super impactful. I think being priced correctly it directly impacts the Google algorithms and how they calculate the relevance of your, not just your paid search, but probably also your organic search. So I think that's kind of a stay tuned one for me as we start to understand it more, but it's certainly from our internal research has a massive impact.
Yeah, and without taking up too much airtime and giving too much of the game away, needless to say, the key takeaways that we've discovered this year is that you've got to be within a certain position of what Google describes as the market price to be visible. Okay, and also one of the takeaways that we've discovered this year is what you have done historically with your pricing. Okay, also determines how visible you are, and what the cost per click you'll have to do to achieve that particular impression in front of the customer. So pricing, whilst we'll put our hands up and say, we haven't solved the full equation of here's the playbook to outdo Google. What we have identified is that pricing has a huge lever on your share of impressions and your total impressions. And so, if you are engaging with a marketing agency to support you with the optimization of your AdWords campaign, don't underestimate and don't forget about pricing in that equation. So we'll stop there because we could open up a whole conversation, but watch this space and stay tuned for future content from us. And so in episode 15, my personal favourite, and I've already said it was the topic buy never knowingly undersold. And this actually, let's just cue the tape.
I think this is a very smart move because it's the difference between value-based pricing and competitor-based pricing, right? In that John Lewis provides value in a whole host of other ways beyond being the cheapest. I find this interesting because I don't think of John Lewis actually as a cheap brand, right?
Well, I was actually going to say earlier, before I went off on a different tangent, it's funny how John Lewis have got this never knowingly undersold price promise, whereas Waitrose, which is the same partnership, has got in the UK this perception that they are, it's not luxury, it's not Harrods, but it's the upmarket supermarket. So it's quite bizarre that they've got.
But I'd argue that for John Lewis as well. The people I know that shop in John Lewis are posh, like in the nicest. Because it's expensive, like the goods are expensive. So it's weird. There is a brand tension there when you're saying, we're the cheapest on these expensive goods.
That's absolutely fair. They've typically got more expensive brands. I mean, I suppose it's also, I always laugh when people say, "Oh, Harrods is expensive," but it's almost like, if you're going to get a comparable products at Harrods, it's probably on the money. But if you're going to buy a diamond ring, you're not going to necessarily find it cheaper elsewhere, because they're selling luxury products.
This again is where the slogan is weird, because for me, the association with John Lewis is, well, apart from the Christmas advert, is quality, right? And good warranties, and so you're buying a better quote unquote branded product. You're getting a warranty, you're getting the customer support and all the rest of it. And that's why traditionally, at least people I've interacted with have shopped there, not because they're the cheapest on that specific product. So it seems weird to basically have to pick this fight unnecessarily, almost, because it doesn't lie up with kind of your core brand value.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, also, people shop there because it's a one-stop shop. It's a department store. It's just easier getting, you can buy a t-shirt and a toaster at the same time. I mean, and some curtains. It's like it's this crazy, this amazing product mix. So, and I think this comes down to, everyone always talks about the price promise being, well, it's trust building. But trust doesn't mean you be the cheapest. If you've got trust, you've got pricing power. And if you've got pricing power, you don't have to be the cheapest. So Rob, what can you remember from this particular podcast? What were your key takeaways?
Don't price much.
But why were we so excited about this? I was uber excited, not because it was John Lewis, but I was kind of
excited because it was John Lewis. And pricing was in the news, and we've been saying it for months or years in some cases. But no, I think it was really interesting in that this notion of having to compete purely on price, and price being the only reason why someone buys from you, the only driver of demand, is quite simplistic, especially in a fully digital world. I know I've been banging on about this and I've been boring the hell out of Philip, but one of the key things that Google says, and they've got a view on all the conversion data of everyone in the whole world, is that usability of your site is probably the biggest driver for conversion in general. So if people are buying to you because of experience or brand or whatever, you probably don't need to match on price and sacrifice the margin there. It may be unsustainable because you may not even be able to compete with other people on it. So that was quite interesting to me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, it was because we were talking about John Lewis, but no, it was value-based pricing out there, front and center in the trade press and the national news, and that was great to see that people were that John Lewis was recognizing the value that it, and I think they already knew, but they sort of felt, well, this promise had been was inbuilt in our DNA right back from, I can't remember the exact date, but it's been around for almost over 100 years, wasn't it? That this particular price.
I dug it up. Gosh, I remember. It was a
long time ago. So I think naturally you've kind of got it ingrained in your DNA, and so I think that was probably why they'd waited so long, and it required a new chief to come in and say, no, we're gonna do this. But it was great to see that businesses were considering the value that they offer for customers rather than just competing on price, as you see. So if you want to hear more, go back to September the 7th as we first started to put on our jumpers this year for those podcasts. Episode 16, I actually really enjoyed, and it was one of those ones that I kind of went into, actually, if I'm honest, going, oh, are we going to have a lot to talk about? Are we kind of opening up a hornet's nest? I mean, it was entitled, "Are You Accidentally Price Fixing?" So let's cue the tape for that one.
Yeah, realistically, you have a tool that automatically gathers data from the internet, and then you have a piece of software that will automatically implement that decision. Usually when a price change has been made. So the tool will recognize that, say, a book on a website has changed by 15p, and then if your pricing rule says you always want to be the lowest, you'll drop your price to either match or undercut that. So if we're talking about price fixing more specifically, say you're just matching your competitors, they make a price change, you match that price change, you both effectively moved your price by the same amount.
So I think one of the bits of data that would be really interesting to get hold of is, of the 25% of the market that is using technology to react to price changes, what technology are they buying? Because one of the reasons that I founded BlackCurve, because I have a fundamental bugbear on why should you follow your competitors if you don't have to? And this is what we mean by the one of the outputs of doing that is not only that you're sometimes you're lowering price when you don't need to, so sometimes you're following, but in this instance, you're accidentally price fixing, in terms of you're accidentally increasing the price unknowingly because you're following a move, and that's causing a negative impact on the market. Because also, are you selling any more because you're making that move? Are you selling, less? You're ignoring so many other pieces of the jigsaw, and that's what frustrates me. So I would love to know, of the 25% of the market, one of the easy ways to do it would be to find out how much money people are actually spending on pricing technology, and then maybe using that as a lever, because typically really basic pricing technology is around about 50, 100 quid a month, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And most of those technologies will simply be saying, right, I want to make sure my market position is number 3 in the market. Okay. As in, my prices are always the third most expensive, or the third cheapest, whichever way you look at it. Or I want to always maintain parity with Rob's Emporium, to borrow a shop from a previous podcast, or Philip's Outdoor Store, right? These are the and if that's all they're doing, is that what we mean by price fixing? Is that there's a risk there? Is that what we mean? That these very basic.
Basically that, right? It's that you're not using any information about supply or demand to dictate what your price should be, which is what you're supposed to do in an efficient market. So if we go around the slightly antagonistic legal question of price fixing, it's exactly what you say. You're not actually charging the optimum amount for that product. You're not maximizing profitability. You're just setting a price because a competitor set at a price.
So what were your key takeaways from that, Rob?
Well, the core thing is, if everyone has competitor driven strategies, it's possible that you just end up stuck in the same place, or which is still possible, still completely possible, because I don't think actually suddenly the entire marketplace moved to value-based pricing. Most people are still running competitive prices. I do think it's kind of, I'm less worried about it this year than I would have been if you'd asked me last year or the year before, because really the key differentiator for a lot of people we work with is whether you have an item in stock or not. And as a consumer at the minute, actually, whether someone has an item in stock or not is probably my key driver to buying, rather than whether someone's cheap or not. I guess what I'm saying is that in a less competitive market, due to lack of stock, this competitive pricing is less impactful. But yeah, I think it's still key. Like, if you're using a simple strategy that just either matches or places you a bit below a competitor, you are inadvertently price fixing, because the machines are talking to machines and saying just keep it here. And I don't think that's changed. I also don't think that e-com has gone through the kind of growing pains that the city went through when the bots started talking to each other, and we had a couple of flash crashes and things like that, driven purely by algorithms. And I reckon the more automated things get, and the less sophisticated technologies do have a liability to blow up or race to the bottom or race to the top even, as well as just freezing.
Thanks for that, Rob. So the next one, I'm gonna, because we're a bit of the way in, I'm going to throw a curveball. We're going to do two at the same time, because actually it's almost like we saw into the future. So in episode 17, we looked at how retailers should approach pricing this holiday season, and that was published in September the 21st. So kind of, at the beginning and the lead up into October and November, your traditional kind of discounting periods. And then in episode 24, we did a pricing teardown on sporting goods, which was actually a retrospective on that particular sporting goods sector, about how they had behaved during the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, although it's kind of been Black Friday month, Cyber Monday month, or even quarter if you look at some people's websites. So let's remind us of some of the takeaways from those podcasts. where should retailers start from their pricing perspective to make sure that they don't, they follow some of Warren. I'm on first name terms with him. Some of Warren's advice to support to survive the economy.
I think it's probably worth looking at the place I'd start is looking at the last lockdown, if I'm completely honest, because the benefit of this one is that we've done it before, and you've had some time to cope and put procedures in place, and it should be recent enough, and you should have been expecting it. So I think the place to start is what were the takeaways, the key takeaways from the last lockdown? Where did people do well? Where did people do less well? And then kind of building on that for me.
So I think we spoke a lot about supply chain constraints, didn't we, last time? But I think we probably should have started a swear jar for the amount of times that we mentioned it. But certainly, even before we look at pricing as the actual physical pricing decisions, you got to get your supply chain sorted, or at least get visibility of your supply chain to enable the subsequent decisions to take place. Because certainly from the case studies that I was involved in and saw, the companies that had visibility of their supply chain and used solutions like BlackCurve to support them with the pricing decisions, it was all about enabling them to hold their nerve, to hold that price point, especially if they had visibility that certain products, the supply chain was going to be constrained and it wasn't going to be restocked. So you win no prizes by selling out too cheaply. So Rob, I think we do have a crystal ball. Do you agree?
Yeah, to a point. It's called listening to our clients, I think.
You've got two of these and one of these.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, we'd certainly heard from customers that they thought Black Friday was going to be less of a thing, and then actually having it on a period where certainly in the UK we're in a national lockdown and no one can go to physical stores anyway, has meant that it's possibly more / less / completely uncomparable to anything we've seen before, because of online sales are up X million billion %, but they were up X million billion % anyway. Obviously there was a seasonal spike in terms of people are still used to buying on Black Friday. There are still discounts, etc., but jury's still out for me, actually. If I'm completely honest, all I can tell you is that it's made my life really hard from a reporting perspective. That's what I know about Black Friday this year. And if I talk to our customers, it's made their lives really hard from a reporting perspective, because there's so much weird stuff going on. It's basically impossible to isolate what's driving what, really, which is what we try to do to communicate kind of the value of pricing to people and why they should work with us. So yeah, it's a mess.
But these are the challenges that we like. I particularly liked episode 24 because it was an excuse for us to look at some tractor toys, which I quite enjoyed.
That was actually my highlight, I think, of the podcast year, was discovering that John Deere tractor.
It is, unfortunately, I'm not convinced you'd fit in it though, Rob. I think it might be.
Yeah, but I shouldn't say that on there.
Maybe.
It's not that rude, but it's a bit mean. I just thought that as solutions engineer we have might like.
So I'm just conscious that we're coming to the top of the hour, and I'm going to save you from getting into any more trouble there. What if we look at all of that as a whole, the bit that I like is that we still haven't cracked it. There's still lots of exciting data challenges, data problems to address. But what's been great to see is that, especially as we've progressed and tried to communicate some of the theory and some of the practices, is that pricing is having a real impact on the businesses that we're working with, and when it's used effectively, it can absolutely hit your bottom line, which is great to see. And some of the takeaways that I've really enjoyed is working with our customers, especially at the beginning of the lockdown, when they've been like, holy cow, how are we going to survive this? And seeing our rules in action. The stock rule, for example, of where supply chains are constrained, and we've enabled them to realize more from that particular sale because the rules have automatically seen into the future and kickstarted it. And that's actually why, more recently we did episode 23 of Can AI Be Used in Pricing? And I think, when used correctly and effectively, it can be really powerful. But also, what's been really nice and an eye opener for me is that even at the low hanging fruit, even at the early stages of pricing optimization, there's huge opportunities where you're just using competitor data to really get a steal on your competition. But again, it's about using that competitor data in the right way and not just taking it on face value.
Yeah, and I'll jump in on that because you said we were going to talk about automation, but we haven't yet. Because I think price automation for me is the key lesson in pricing in 2020. Because if you can get your pricing automation to perform, let's say, 80%, 90% as effectively as the human management of it, when everything goes to hell in a handcart, you can leave that and focus your human resource on solving like the really hard business challenges in the current trading environment we have, not take up time kind of manually uploading CSVs.
Because I think a lot of the time, the automation enables you to rapidly, at scale, repeatably make decisions across your whole entire inventory. In the best of will of the world, even when you're in a non-COVID era, it's hard enough to do. But it even proves itself when you're being pulled in lots of different directions. Yeah, the power of automation.
Even more important now, probably than. I mean, we actually spoke about this, and this would probably be my key statement I made in the podcast this year, is that given the environment now, automate pricing with a simple competitor repricer. If you have nothing else, right? If you have the time, optimize it, fantastic. But you will gain that benefit, quote unquote, immediately, free up resource. I would say use a more sophisticated one that's not going to tank your margins, but you can quite simply, using someone like us, automate a process, free up a load of time, and get people, like I said, focusing on things like the crisis points that actually need human level decision. Because I think the interesting thing for pricing in 2020, just to close that out, is that pricing has played backseat to stock in 2020. Normally it's often the other way around, because we've been purely in a supply driven economy rather than a demand driven economy for once. So it's kind of like that's where your energy should be. So being able to kind of take this other process, automate it at scale, like you said, and the scale is the important bit, like over multiple thousands of SKUs, to do it accurately and regularly. Would be a great place to start, a good thing to do, I think, certainly this year.
So head to blackcurve.com and hit free trial now. That's how we're going to end it. So thank you very much, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is actually episode 25, so I think that's a good way to good number to end 2020 on and roll on 2021. So Merry Christmas to everyone listening. We hope you've enjoyed this year, and next year is going to be even better. So from Santa and me, Merry Christmas, and look forward to working with you next year. Take care. Bye-bye.